I want you to imagine something for a second. You are completely alone. It is 2 in the morning. The building around you is dark and silent, except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. You have been sitting in that same chair for 4 hours with nothing to do but stare at cameras, listen to the quiet, and tell yourself that everything is fine. And then, without any warning at all, something changes. You cannot explain what it is. It is not a sound exactly. It is more like a feeling. The feeling that something in the room with you has shifted. Something that was not there a moment ago is now there. And the worst part, the part that makes your stomach drop all the way to the floor, is that you realize you have absolutely no way out. That is the thing about working nights. The darkness does not just exist outside, it gets in. And once it is in, it stays. These are 4 real stories from 4 real people who found that out the hard way. My name is Daniel. I am 26 years old, and for the past year and a half I have been working the overnight shift at a 24-hour pharmacy in a mid-sized city. It is not the kind of job most people would find interesting, and honestly, most nights, it is not. I count pills, stock shelves, answer the occasional phone call from someone who sounds like they have not slept in 3 days. The parking lot outside. My window is usually empty by midnight. Just the orange glow of the streetlights and the occasional car drifting past on the road beyond. I have gotten so used to the quiet that I barely notice it anymore. That changed about 2 months ago, and I have not been the same since. It started with the phone calls. We have a landline at the pharmacy counter for customer inquiries. It rings maybe 5 or 6 times a night on a busy shift, usually people asking about their prescription or whether we carry some specific brand of something. Normal stuff. But one night, a Tuesday I think, the phone rang at around 1:15 in the morning. I picked it up and said my usual greeting. There was silence on the other end. Not dead silence. I could hear something in the background. Breathing, I thought, though I told myself it was probably just a bad connection. I said hello a couple more times, got nothing, and hung up. I figured it was a wrong number. It happens. The phone rang again 11 minutes later. I know it was 11 minutes because I checked the clock the first time and then again when it rang the second time. Same thing. Dead air. Faint sound in the background that I could not quite make out. I hung up again, a little less comfortable, this time. By the third call, which came at 1:44, my hands were already a bit unsteady when I reached for the receiver. This time, before I could even say anything, I heard a voice. It was low, barely above a whisper, and it said, "Clear as anything, you should check the back room." I put the phone down and just stood there for a second trying to process what had just happened. A rational part of my brain was telling me it was a prank. Kids do stupid stuff like that sometimes. But another part of me, the part that had been sitting alone in that building for 4 hours, was already running every possible scenario that ended badly. I almost called my manager. I almost walked out entirely. But I have always been the kind of person who hates feeling afraid of something I cannot confirm. So I did something that I now understand was genuinely stupid. I went to check the back room. The back room at our pharmacy is a long, narrow storage area behind the main counter. It is where we keep the overstock, the cleaning supplies, the big industrial shelving units loaded with boxes that only the pharmacist is supposed to go through during the day. At night, it is dim back there. Only one of the overhead lights actually works and it flickers. The door creaks when you open it. I pushed it open with my shoulder and stood in the doorway and turned on my phone flashlight and swept it across the room. Shelving units, boxes, the mop and bucket in the corner. Nothing unusual. I exhaled. Told myself to stop letting some random caller get into my head. Went back to the counter. The phone did not ring again that night. I finished my shift, handed off to the morning staff, went home, and slept. But when I came back the following night, one of my co-workers mentioned something offhand while we were doing the shift handover. She said that when she had come in that morning, the back door of the pharmacy, the emergency exit at the end of the storage room, had been left unlocked. She assumed someone on the closing team had forgotten to check it. She had not thought much of it. I had. Because I know for a fact that I checked that door at the start of my shift the previous night. I always do. It had been locked when I arrived. Something had either been in that room when I checked it and I had missed it, or something had come in through that door during the night while I was sitting 15 feet away at the counter. Neither of those possibilities made me feel good. But that is not even the worst of it. The worst part did not happen until about a week later. I had been jumpy ever since that night, checking the back room more often than I needed to. Keeping the door propped open so I could see straight through it from the counter. Nothing happened for 6 or 7 nights and I was starting to relax again. Then, just as I was settling into that false sense of calm, something made every hair on my body stand up straight. I was sitting at the counter just after 3 in the morning, completely alone, when I looked up at the security monitor we have mounted above the register. It shows a split feed from 4 different cameras throughout the store. And in the top right corner, which is the camera that covers the back storage room, I saw something that stopped my heart cold. There was a shape in the corner of the frame, behind the industrial shelving unit, partially hidden by the angle of the camera. It was dark, and the resolution on those monitors is not great, so I could not make out details. But it was there, a shape that had not been there 5 minutes ago when I had glanced at the same camera. A shape that was roughly the height and width of a person standing very still against the wall. I hit the call button for the after-hours security line so fast I knocked my water bottle off the counter. I kept my eyes on that monitor while I waited for someone to pick up. 30 seconds, a minute. The shape did not move. Then the security line connected, and I started trying to explain what I was seeing, and I glanced back at the monitor, and the corner of the frame was empty. Just the shelving units and the dim flicker of that single overhead light. Nothing else. Security came and did a sweep. Found nothing. Checked the back door. Locked. Reviewed the full camera footage from the past 2 hours and found nothing that explained what I had seen. The officer who came out told me it was probably shadows from the flickering light playing tricks on my eyes. He was not unkind about it, but I could tell he did not believe anything had really been there. I am still not sure I believe it myself. All I know is that I have requested a shift change 3 times since then and been denied every time. And every single night when I walk in through that front door, I tell myself that tonight will be normal. So far, I have been right. But the feeling that I was wrong about that room being empty does not go away. Some nights I sit at that counter and I think about the back door being unlocked, and I think about the voice on the phone, and I wonder if whatever was in there that night ever actually left. My name is Priya. I am 31 years old, and about 8 months ago I left my job as a night auditor at a hotel on the edge of the city. I want to be clear that I loved that job for almost 2 years before the thing I'm going to describe happened. It was quiet, the pay was decent, and I genuinely enjoyed the handful of interactions I had with guests during the night. Most of them were just people passing through who needed a room, normal and forgettable in the best possible way. But hotels are strange places after midnight. The hallways go on forever, and the lighting is always slightly too dim, and there is something about a building full of closed doors that makes the imagination do things it should not. About 10 months into the job, I started noticing a pattern with one of our long-term guests. He had checked in under the name Mr. Calloway, and he was booked on a corporate account for an extended stay, something to do with a construction project in the area, apparently. He was in room 214. Quiet guy. Kept to himself during the day, and I almost never saw him. But at night he walked the hallways. I would catch him on the corridor cameras, usually between midnight and 4 in the morning, just walking. Up and down the hallway outside his room, then sometimes the floor above, sometimes the ground floor near the lobby. Always slow. Always alone. Guests do strange things when they cannot sleep, so I did not flag it at first. But after the 3rd or 4th night of seeing the same footage, I started to feel uneasy about it. There was something about the way he walked, unhurried in a way that felt less like someone struggling with insomnia and more like someone who simply had nowhere specific to be, someone waiting. I mentioned it to my manager during one of our weekly check-ins. She said he had been a perfectly pleasant guest during regular hours, paid on time, no complaints from housekeeping. She told me to keep an eye on it, but not to worry. so I tried not to. For a while, that worked. Until one night, maybe 6 weeks into his stay, I was sitting at the front desk just after 2 in the morning when the elevator doors opened and Mr. Calloway walked into the lobby. He came directly to the desk. He was wearing the same thing I had seen him wear every time I spotted him on the cameras. Dark shirt, dark trousers, like he had never actually gone to bed. He stood at the desk and asked me in a completely calm voice whether the hotel kept records of which guests had stayed in each room over the past year. I told him I was not able to share that kind of information, that it was private guest data. He nodded like he had expected me to say that. Then he asked, just as calmly, whether I had ever noticed anything unusual about room 214. Something. In the way he said it made the skin on the back of my neck prickle. I asked him what he meant by unusual. He said he had been hearing sounds through the walls at night, not from the neighboring rooms, from inside the walls themselves. Scratching, he said, like something moving through the structure of the building. I told him I would have maintenance look into it. He said he would appreciate that. Then he turned and walked back to the elevator and the doors closed, and he was gone. I sat at that desk for the rest of the night, trying to convince myself that he was just an anxious man with an overactive imagination, and that whatever he heard was probably pipes or rodents or the normal settling sounds of an old building. But the thing that bothered me, the thing I could not shake, was that he had not looked afraid when he told me about the sounds. He had looked curious, like a man who had already decided what the sounds were and was simply verifying his conclusion. Maintenance. Checked room 214 the next afternoon. Found nothing. No signs of rodents, no structural issues, no explanation for any unusual sounds. The report came back clean. I read it during my next shift and felt slightly better. Then, about 3 nights later, I was doing my usual camera review around 3 in the morning when I noticed something on the feed from the second-floor hallway. Mr. Calloway was doing his usual walking back and forth, slow and even. I watched him for a moment, as I usually did, and then I almost knocked my chair backwards, because at the far end of the hallway, visible only for a second before the camera angle cut off, there was someone else, standing completely still at the end of the corridor, just standing there facing Mr. Calloway as he walked toward them. I cycled the camera to the next angle to get a better look, and the hallway was empty. Nobody there. Not Mr. Calloway either. Just an empty corridor with all. The room doors closed. I called the overnight security guard on duty and asked him to do a sweep of the second floor. He found nothing. When I checked Mr. Calloway's room key log, it showed his card had been used to open room 214 9 minutes before I saw him on the camera. So if he had gone back to his room, who was walking the hallway? And who was standing at the end of it? The security footage from that angle was inconclusive. My manager looked at it the next day and said the figure I thought I saw was probably a camera artifact, a glitch in the feed that looked like a person due to the low light. She was probably right. She was probably right. But I think about that figure at the end of the hallway a lot. And I think about the fact that Mr. Calloway checked out 4 days later without any notice or explanation, and that housekeeping found every single piece of furniture in room 214 pushed against the walls. Every piece, including the bed, as if someone had wanted to clear the center of the room entirely. Nobody could explain it. The corporate account it was charged to turned out to be registered to a company that no longer existed. We never heard from him again. This is the one that I have never fully talked about out loud. I have mentioned parts of it to people who were close to me at the time, but I have never laid the whole thing out from beginning to end, because every time I try to start, something in me resists it. Like my own brain would rather keep certain parts buried, but here it is. About 3 years ago, I was 22 and working nights at an all-night laundromat in a part of the city that was not exactly upscale, but was not dangerous either. It was the kind of neighborhood that had a hardware store and a check-cashing place and a Thai restaurant that closed at 9, and that was about it. The laundromat was open until 4 in the morning, and I worked from 10 at night until closing, alone. My job was basically to make sure the machines were running, handle any issues with payments, clean the place down at the end of the night, and lock up. Most nights, maybe a dozen customers would come and go. By 2 or 3 in the morning, it was almost always empty. I had been working there about 4 months when a regular started coming in. I call her a regular because she came in 3 or 4 nights a week without fail, always around 1 in the morning, always with the same 2 bags of laundry, always paid in cash. She was maybe 60 or 65. Small woman, gray hair pulled. Back tight. She never spoke first. If I said good evening, she would nod. If I asked if she needed anything, she would shake her head. She would load her machines, sit in one of the plastic chairs in the middle of the room, and watch her laundry. Not her phone. Not a book, just her laundry going around and around, every single time. I found it odd but harmless. People get into routines, and there is nothing wrong with that. One night, a night that had been completely empty of other customers since around midnight, I was mopping the far end of the laundromat near the back wall when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my footing. It was her, the regular. She was standing directly behind me, and she had apparently crossed the entire length of the building in complete silence because I had not heard a single footstep. She was looking at me with an expression I could not read, and before I could say anything, she put one finger to her lips. She looked toward the front windows of the laundromat, and then back at me and shook her head very slightly, like she was telling me not to speak, and more than that, like she was telling me that something outside those windows was listening. Turned and looked toward the front of the building. The windows were fogged from the heat of the machines. I could not see the parking lot clearly, but there was something pressed against the glass. Not a face, not quite. It was a shape. Darker than the night outside, which should not have been possible, and it was pressed flat against the window like it was trying to see through the condensation. And it was still. Completely still. Not moving at all. Just there, on the other side of the glass, at 1:40 in the morning, in an empty parking lot. I felt frozen. Not from fear exactly, though I was afraid, more like my body was simply refusing to process the information fast enough to act on it. The woman behind me had not moved. I could still feel her presence, and then the shape shifted. It did not walk away. It did not turn and leave. It sort of slid sideways, toward the edge of the window, and then it was gone. Not gone like a person walking out of frame. Gone like something being pulled out of view very quickly by something else. One moment it was there, the next it was not. The woman behind me said, in a voice so quiet I almost did not hear it, "Do not go outside." That was all she said, and then she walked back to her chair and sat down and went back to watching her laundry as if nothing had happened. I stood with my mop in my hands for probably 2 full minutes before I moved. Then I went to the front door and locked it. The lock was already engaged. I had locked it at closing time as usual, which meant that whatever had been pressed against, that window had walked up to a building that was locked and stood there looking in. I did not go to the windows. I did not unlock the door and look outside. I finished the shift from behind the counter with every light in the building on, which I had never done before. The woman finished her laundry, folded it neatly into her 2 bags, walked to the door, waited for me to unlock it, nodded once, and left. I watched her walk across the parking lot to an old beige car parked under the far light. She drove away. The parking lot was empty and perfectly normal looking in the overhead lights. No one there. Nothing pressed against the glass from the outside. Just the ordinary nighttime quiet of an ordinary street. I called out sick the next 2 nights. When I went back, the regular was not there. She did not come back for 3 weeks. When she finally did, I wanted to ask her about it. I tried twice to bring it up, and both times she just shook her head before I even got the words out. Like she had already decided we were not going to talk about it. I quit that job 2 months later for unrelated reasons. But I think about that shape on the glass more often than I would like. And I think about the fact that she knew to put her finger to her lips before I even had a chance to react. Like she had already seen this before. Like she knew exactly what the rules were. My name is Marcus, and I need to tell you something before I get into this because I am aware of how it sounds. I am a practical person. I spent 4 years as a licensed electrician before I transitioned into facilities management, which is the job I was working when this happened. I deal with physical systems, with things that have logical explanations and measurable causes. I am not someone who is given to seeing things that are not there, or interpreting normal events as something more than what they are. I say all of this because what I am about to describe is something I cannot explain, and that matters to me more than it might matter to someone else, because I spent a very long time trying to explain it. About 2 years ago, I was the facilities manager for a mid-sized office building in the downtown area. Modern building, 12 floors, the usual mix of corporate tenants. My official hours were 9 to 5, but the nature of facilities work meant I often came in early or stayed late, and every few months I would pull an overnight when we had major systems work happening, HVAC upgrades, network infrastructure, that kind of thing. I did not mind. The overtime was good, and I have always been comfortable in empty buildings. Or I was, until this particular overnight. It was a Wednesday. We were running cable through the 10th floor to support a tenant who was expanding their office space. A contractor crew was supposed to be there with me, but they got a call about an emergency at another site and had to bail at 11. They said they would be back by 2 or 3 in the morning. So from about 11 until sometime after 2, I was alone in the building. The security desk was staffed by a guard named Roy, who was stationed in the lobby on the ground floor. Otherwise, it was just me, 12 floors of dark, empty office space, and the hum of the building systems. I was working on the 10th floor, tracing a cable route through the ceiling tiles, when my radio crackled. It was Roy down in the lobby. He sounded confused. He said the elevator indicator panel at his desk was showing the elevator moving, going up, floor by floor. He said he had not called the elevator, and nobody had badged in through any of the ground floor entry points. He asked if I had sent it up for some reason. I had not touched the elevator. I was nowhere near it. I told him that, and there was a pause, and then he said quietly that the elevator had just stopped on the 10th floor. My floor. I stood very still and listened. The elevator bank on the 10th floor was about 40 feet from where I was standing, around a corner and down a short hallway. I waited for the doors to open. I could hear the mechanical sound of the elevator settling, that faint thud and hiss that elevators make when they arrive. I waited for the doors. They did not open. I could hear that the elevator had arrived. But the doors did not open. I radioed Roy and asked him if the doors had opened according to his panel. He said yes. The indicator showed the doors had opened on 10, but standing 40 feet away with nothing between me and that elevator hallway, I could tell you with absolute certainty that those doors had not opened. The sound of an elevator opening is unmistakable. There was no sound, just the arrival. And then after about 30 seconds, the elevator began descending again. Floor by floor, back down to the lobby. Roy's voice came back on the radio. He said the elevator was back at the ground floor. He said the lobby was empty. He said he was looking directly at the front entrance and nobody had come in or out. Something had ridden the elevator up to my floor, stood on the other side of a closed door for 30 seconds, and ridden it back down. Whatever it was, it had not badged in through any entry point. It had not triggered any of the external sensors. And it had not opened the elevator doors, even though the control panel 40 feet and 12 floors below registered that the doors had opened. I finished the cabling job in about 40 minutes. Fast. Much faster than it should have taken. Roy stayed on the radio with me for the rest of the night, which I appreciated more than I told him. The contractor crew came back at 2:30, and I have never been so relieved to hear the sound of boots coming through a door. I did not tell them what had happened. I did not want to be the facilities manager who got spooked by a glitchy elevator. I pulled the elevator maintenance log the next morning. No mechanical errors logged, no fault codes. The system recorded the movement perfectly, going up and coming back down, doors opening on the 10th floor for 28 seconds, doors closing, descent. All of it recorded exactly as Roy and I had experienced it. Normal system behavior, according to the log. Everything functioning exactly as it should. I had the elevator company send a technician anyway. He found nothing wrong with the equipment. He had no explanation for why the doors would register as open when they had clearly not opened physically. He said it was possibly a sensor calibration issue. He said possibly. He did not say definitely. He did not say probably. He said possibly. And I have been thinking about that word ever since. I still work in facilities management. Different building now, for reasons that have nothing to do with that night, or so I tell myself. I do not pull overnight shifts anymore, not by choice. I just make sure I am never the one who volunteers for them. Some of the guys I work with think I am lazy for that. They do not know what I heard on the 10th floor of that building. They do not know what it sounds like to hear an elevator arrive and wait and leave without ever opening its doors. If they did, I think they would understand. There is something that every single one of these people has in common, something beyond the obvious fact that they were all working nights when their stories happened. It is this. In each case, the thing that scared them most was not a sound or a shadow or an object out of place. It was the absence of an explanation. A door that was locked but should not have been. A shape that was there and then was not. An elevator that behaved exactly as it should except for the one detail that made no sense. A woman who knew to be quiet before there was any reason to be. The human brain can make peace with almost anything it can categorize. What it cannot handle, what stays with you for years and surfaces in the dark at 2 a.m. when you are alone in your own house and the room is quiet and there is that sound from somewhere you cannot quite identify, is the thing that refuses to fit into any category at all. The thing that simply should not be and yet was. That is the thing that follows you home. That is the thing that keeps the light on. Sleep well.